dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
One thing a Christian leader can be sure of is that they will be asked to carry the cross with Jesus. But carrying a cross isn't easy for anybody, and few of us embrace it as we should. St. Francis de Sales, a spiritual master of the early 1600s, knew this very well, and he wrote to the leaders of this world with encouragement to carry the crosses that God gave them with Jesus. But what does this mean for us today? By reading letters that he wrote to persons in the world, we can discover some of what he meant. I just love St. Francis de Sales for many reasons. This guy was, one of them being just that he doesn't run away from the real practicalities of the sheep that he's dealing with. I mean, he's a bishop who really takes care of his people. They're asking him spiritual questions and for spiritual advice, and he's giving it to them by means of these letters. Some of the letters that he writes are very long, 4 or 5 pages long. Others letters that he writes are a lot briefer and to the point, and some of them are hurried. A lot of times he's apologizing for being busy. He's real. Right? And he's real in a difficult circumstance. Being a bishop is never easy, but being a bishop of Geneva in his time frame was particularly trying because he was in an area of the world that had left the church that he was representing, had it split. And when you split in the church, you split culture, you split traditions, you split family life. There's a lot of difficulty and strain. And Francis de Sales went into that trying to bring people back to the unity of the Catholic Church that he represented. And as he did this, he also had to maintain the normalcy of normal human questions that come his way, from sick people to people who are suffering lawsuits to people who have children who are no longer practicing the faith. I mean, he goes through all the same questions that we have today, and he writes these beautiful letters to them. He was given the gift of eloquence and given the gift also of compelling words. And it's my joy to share some of these with you because I think, of course, that his wisdom from his day is something that we can very much tap into today for ourselves in our own lives. And in all of his letters, there's many themes that he brings up, but one of them that's the most constant is his insistence that his people that he cares about carry their crosses and that they learn how to see inside of suffering a gift from God. And I know that this is a hard thing for people to hear, especially today, because in our culture, we've accustomed ourselves to thinking that it's normal to not suffer. So when we are suffering, we need it to be taken away. And of course, we have so many means by which we can take suffering away, from vacations by which we can simply escape the world into some, the other world, which is much more pleasant, right? To, being able even to turn the air conditioning on in our houses. If we're hot, we cool off. If we're cold, we heat up. We're used to having all of the comforts that we need to avoid suffering, from the wonderful clothes that we're able to wear and the great variety of them to even the way that we travel in our cars, which are quite often very comfortable vehicles, and we get so used to it that when we do encounter suffering, we focus in on it as if our sole goal was to get rid of it. And I'm not here to criticize that, right? I think that's just part of the simply understanding how our minds can work. Because how different it sounds then when you hear a saint say that you need to suffer with Jesus. We can even get angry and say, what kind of God would allow us to continue to suffer? And I kind of chuckle a little bit to myself when I hear that, because I understand that the reality is, like, we don't want to suffer. Suffering is not something that God wants us to have for its own sake, right? And it's certainly good for us to try to alleviate it, right? I'm not going to glorify suffering by any stretch of the imagination, but I am able to look at my faith and see the cross and see Jesus on the cross and understand that God is saying that while suffering is not something that we should embrace for its own sake, that he has overcome it and in fact transformed it and filled it with his presence to make it something that can, with his grace, become a sacred sharing in his very life, right? By suffering, we can be united with Jesus and be united with Jesus on the cross, share in his inner victory that he has over suffering. Right? And this is the path that Christians then are called to try on, because no matter how hard we try, and no matter how fine it is to try to avoid it, when we can, at the same time, we're not going to be able to win and succeed at that. One way or the other, every single person carries this cross. I think about this every once in a while. I hear people that come in and they'll share with me that, listen, Father, I've got this or that problem. And we were priests, we're always there to hear that. And so we spend a lot of our time as priests consoling the suffering. And yet sometimes people will say, I'm so glad you listened to me, because whenever I share with other people, they end up just telling me about their problems as well. And I can't find anyone who's willing just to hear me out. And it's, of course, kind of amusing for us, to think about that, because we will hear you out. That's what we do. And we're compassionate people. But the truth is also that everybody's got it. Everybody has something going on. And the longer that I live and serve as a priest, the more that I'm convinced and experience this, that while everybody's suffering is unique and we hold it, with compassion and empathy for everybody, at the same time, everybody's got something. And this is something we often forget. When I used to be a garbage man, which is a true fact, I was blessed to be a garbage man, a sanitation engineer, as we called ourselves, in small town Ohio when I was a young man trying to make my way through college. And working as a garbage man, I always noticed something, and that's that all garbage smells the same. You could go to a poor person's house, you could go to a migrant workers camp, or you could go to the wealthiest street in that small town with huge houses, and all the garbage smells the same. There's a smell to garbage, and every time I smell it to this day, it harkens me back to those long summers and those cold winters where I was throwing that garbage and thinking to myself, it still smells the same. It smelled the same 30 years ago as it smells today. It's that sweet kind of rotting smell of garbage. Well, it's to go to show that just like everybody's got garbage, everybody has problems and pain. And so trying to avoid it really is kind of, not the ultimate point of life. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned about how to endure it, right? How do we actually go through these difficulties? Because some of the suffering is there that it comes for us from without, from other people, from choices that they make or situations that we find ourselves in. But other kinds of suffering is simply part and parcel of what we have chosen to achieve. If you choose to become a parent, get ready for huge suffering. Right? But we would never give up the parenthood because of the suffering. That's because we've learned to endure it. There are those who would give up parenthood because of the suffering. Unfortunately, they didn't learn that skill. Well, in the same way, there are those who would never try to start their own business. And yet, how sad is that? What a glorious thing to begin your own business, to start your own affair, to run your own, to work and run your own enterprise and pay yourself your own pay that you get it's a glorious thing. Ah, yes, but it's very difficult. And how do we endure those kinds of suffering? The suffering that doesn't just come from others, but that comes from our own decisions, or that comes as part and parcel of what we're trying to achieve and the good things that we're trying to achieve in our life. Dealing with suffering is simply part of what it means to be successful. And it's even more a part of what it means to become a saint. And so if you are successful and Christ is calling you to be a saint, or if you are a saint and God's asking you to be successful, well, you need to learn the secret to suffering. And this is where the wisdom of St. Francis de Sales can really illuminate us in beautiful ways. And I'm going to get into some letters here and read to you some of his insights because they're so poignant and so good for us who are involved in the things of this world.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
St. Francis de Sales was a Catholic bishop in Geneva operating in the early 1600s, right? So the Protestant Reformation was, 1531. And so he's not even 100 years after the Reformation, something like 70, 80 years after the Reformation. He's working as a bishop in a very highly split and divided country at the time of Switzerland. And he's writing in 1606, he writes to a young lady, all right? And he defines here what he sees as true Christian courage. She had written him a letter in which she had spoken about, different things happening in her life and asking him for guidance. And he encourages her. Now, watch how he encourages her. This is something that we might find shocking if we misunderstand it, but try not to misunderstand it. Try to see what he's trying to say here. He says, keep closely to holy humility and the love of your own abjection, right? So abjection would mean to love those very parts of yourselves which aren't perfect or which are in fact, not the greatest, not the best. I think that's really amazing because if you were a leadership coach today, you would say, if you find those elements yourself where you're abject, you just become better than that. You have to ignore them basically, or you have to overcome them and then you'll be really successful. And I think that that's fine in terms of motivation because all of us are like, hey, we have to be better. That's just, part and parcel thing. St. Francis de Sales says that many different places. We have to be better. We have to fight the good fight. We have to strive for virtue and all of this. Okay. But what happens if, in fact, you listen to that type of coaching coming from the world and then you don't improve? Well, it's kind of like watching a bus just kind of pull away from you and you're stuck on the sidewalk because you couldn't get on the bus. And sometimes this is why people stop in leadership development. They stop in their own progress because they say, you know what, I can't do it. It's like going on a diet. After you try for year and year and year, and then you just say, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy my life, right? Because this is ridiculous. And holiness, the Christian life, interestingly, is not found by us overcoming our weaknesses in themselves, but in embracing God even when we're weak. So we will overcome them, but we overcome them by God's grace. And not by the sheer effort of our will. And of course, it's a little bit involved, right? Like his grace that inspires us to fight the good fight and just try real hard and all this. And that's very important. But we have to remember that his grace is given to us even when we are abject and even when we're broken down. And this lesson is what he wants this woman to do. Is first of all, learn to love your abjection and stay close to humility. And this isn't in order to stay fallen or to stay weak, but as the first step to getting better with Christ in a Christian way, not by our own will alone, but by God's grace working in us. And he says as much. He keeps going and he says, know that the heart which loves God must be attached only to the love of God. If this same God wills to give it another love, he may. So first of all, we're attached to God. And then if God says get married and have a family, well, then that's what he's given us to do. And this is something that we should accept then and live. But we always live with this priority, God first. God is the source of all the other loves that we have, just as those other loves are the source of the action with which we serve them, right? But God's at the foundation of everything. And so if we forget that, we'll also lose our strength to perform those other things well. We won't serve because we won't really love, and we won't really love because our love didn't come from God. Right? We base it on anything else, it can change. Only God, who is changeless, can give us a love that then allows us to serve without changing, with a constancy, that belongs to the Christian soul, right? That's something that we should be able to embrace and live in a beautiful way. And so he continues with this beautiful line. He says, I am sure that this good daughter, meaning you, the one he's writing to, will not keep her heart back. I just love that. I think that's so manly, right? And so fatherly of him to encourage his daughter. I'm sure that my daughter will not keep her heart back, right? Now, a lot of us can immediately stop there and say, well, that's true because we can believe that God loves us. We can believe that we receive grace. But then what are we supposed to do with it? It's hard for us to then take that next step, right? Because then if we give ourselves back and love in return, well, now things can become risky. We might lose time. We might lose energy. It's a really hard thing for us to love in return. And a lot of times Christians will therefore say it's all about God. It's about God and his love for you, and you don't have to be any better. You can just receive God's grace, and then it doesn't even matter if you progress because it's all about Jesus. And there's something true about that, but there's also something that's not true, okay? Because the beautiful thing in the truth is that the love of God summons our love in return, and that the grace of God summons our work in return. He gives us his grace so that we fight for him. And so you got St. Francis de Sales on the one hand saying, love your abjection. On the other hand, do not hold your heart back. And then he continues with this beautiful teaching. He says, my dear daughter, how falsely do we call courage what is haughtiness and vanity? Right? So in the world, in a worldly way of looking at things, we will call courage all these things that in the end aren't really even courageous. They might be courageous to a certain degree. I mean, like storming up a hill, or jumping out of some sort of plane in outer space and, free falling to the earth, or, scaling mountaintops. Yes, that's a kind of courage. You can call it that. But he's saying that there's something even deeper that a Christian is called to. And this is important for us because we're talking about how to bear sufferings. And there's no way to bear them without courage. And what is this courage that he's talking about? He says, Christians call these worldly examples of courage cowardice and faint-heartedness. As on the contrary, they call these things courage, patience, gentleness, mildness, humility, and the acceptance and love of contempt and objection. So you can kind of see, now he doesn't develop it a lot in this particular letter, but you can see where he's going with this, and it's something I want to pass on to you, right? Because as we're trying to live as Christians in the midst of this world, we have to be courageous. And we have to be courageous in a worldly sense. We have to take the risk. Hire people that we don't have enough money to pay for necessarily. Expand our businesses if God's calling us to do it, or sell your business and move on to the next thing. I mean, if you're in business or you're in the professional world, you're constantly on a tightrope of life. And it takes a lot of courage, right? And here's St. Francis de Sales reminding us that yes, that's part of it. But the real courage that you're going to have is the courage of heart to stay faithful to love, faithful to the love of God in particular, right? And not to allow yourself to be caught up in yourself. When you read and study closely what this letter is saying, he's actually making a difference that you can read between the lines to find. And he's saying that a worldly definition of courage is one that is built upon self-exaltation. And this is, of course, there's nothing intrinsically bad about this. It's just that it's very shallow. To exalt yourself and to push yourself to new heights in the eyes of others. And it's shallow only because if the opinions of others change, then your feat of exaltation also loses its value. And it's also shallow because in the end, what are you doing it for? You're doing it so that you could say you were the first or you were the best. Well, this is fine, but no one's going to remember when you're dead. Nothing's going to stay afterwards of all this. And so St. Francis de Sales says, go for the deeper thing. Go for the higher thing. And what's the higher thing? It's the quality of your soul. And here, the truth is your guide. The truth both of what you're trying to love, which is someone other than you, namely either God or with God, the people that he's called you to serve in your life. And at the same time, it's the truth about your own weaknesses. To stay constant when you're even aware of your failures. Constant to hope, constant to love, constant to that dedication of serving the other people in this world. St. Francis de Sales says that's true courage. Because now you're not just basing upon your own strength, you're basing it even despite your weakness and the hope in God. So you really have an example here of what true courage is. And it's that courage that we'll need to bear with the suffering that he's going to advise us on here in a few letters I want to take a look at with you now.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
So St. Francis de Sales, speaks about interior courage in his letters. And he defines that interior courage in terms of fidelity. And I think that's really important for us because we forget the value of fidelity in a world that rewards material success. Okay, just be honest with you. The thing about material success is the problem is not that it's material. It's just that the problem is that material things come and they go, and they mean very little after they've been bestowed. I mean, you could win the greatest awards that there are, and if we aren't finding our value in the value of what we're actually doing, then we're engaging in a wild goose chase, just to be honest with you. Because most of us do is we say something has value because other people say it does. Right? And therefore, we run after the opinions of others and what they've put forward for us as being truly valuable. And therefore, our hearts get set on that. We think that we're good when we achieve that. But in fact, it's completely arbitrary. It simply depends upon the whim of the culture that's around us to define what has true value. There's another way to live. The other way to live is to say, I am engaging in what is truly valuable. And my value is to stay thus engaged and to succeed at what is truly good. If the thing is truly good in and of itself, the activity that I'm doing warrants my efforts, right? And not the reward that I'm going to gain from it. And so the true courage is going to be doing what is good and what is right and what is holy, regardless of what everyone else thinks. This is where true fidelity, and that fidelity, that quality of the soul, St. Francis de Sales says that's true courage. When you engage in the pursuit of that, we need to help our young people to discover this. We need to help pass this on as what our true goal in life should be. It's not because we succeed in a worldly way that we actually succeed in our souls. This is the difference. The worldly way of success is based upon a worldly measurement, and God bless everybody, But listen, we're Christians, and what we know is a deeper way of success and a truer way of success. And it's made by measurements that aren't dictated by the whims of the culture, but that are set for us in God himself. And so, yes, we can still succeed in the culture, hopefully, but at the same time, we don't need to succeed in the culture to really succeed. If we're faithful to God, faithful to his love, then we have something that nothing else in the world could procure. We have a spiritual reality in our souls called fidelity. The St. Francis de Sales says is really important, especially when we're suffering, to have this courage that will allow us to carry the cross, a courage for the cross, because it's a courage that comes from the cross, right? Just as Jesus endured suffering, and endured suffering not just in terms of physical pain, but endured the loss of things that he could never get again. And he went through that loss, giving it to God. He gives us an example of how we are supposed to walk through the things that can happen to us in this life. And some of those things are extremely painful. They're very sad. When you have to suffer injustice and things are taken from you that can never be given back, right? And you're left saying, wait, who will give me justice? And the answer is no one. You can be left bereft. You could become depressed. You could say life isn't meaningful. Or you can turn to God and say, God, you hear my prayer and my life is in your hands. And so I surrender myself entirely to your good pleasure over my life. And therein you find a type of constancy that doesn't turn pain into pain, but that turns pain into prayer. Right? This surrender to God's will. This is what St. Francis de Sales speaks of over and over again. Here's an example in a letter that he wrote to a woman who was suffering from very great headaches. I mean, incapacitating, debilitating headaches. And some of you who are listening, you might have the same sorrow, right? But he encourages her to see therein a deeper lesson, right? It's not that God's going to take your headache away. It's that God's going to use this circumstance to enthrone himself more deeply in your life. He says, I commend you to God to obtain for you that sacred patience. And I cannot ask him anything for you except that he would fashion your heart just at his will in order to lodge and reign therein eternally. May he do it with the hammer or with the chisel or with the brush. It is for him to act at his pleasure. So it's like, wow, on the one hand, that's really hard to say, right? Because it sounds like he's not being empathetic. He is. Elsewhere, he says, he says beautiful things. He says, as your pains increase, so my sorrow for them also increases. So he's being empathetic, but he's reminding her of something. And that is that the pain is not final and that suffering is not final. That in fact, there's something that's done through and in that suffering that if we're courageous enough to be patient with, we can find a value, a gift that comes from God alone. And so he encourages her. He says, when you have this, accept this pain from his hand, as if you saw him putting and pressing it onto your head. She's getting headaches. Accept it from him. So it doesn't mean, he says later on, take your medicines, try to overcome this. It's not glorifying suffering. But when you can't do anything about it, he's saying, you find Jesus in it. That's a profound lesson for us, because it takes so much courage for us to do that. And then he says, try to offer yourself to him through that pain. I think this is an important lesson for us, because if you want to ask the question, what's the difference between a Christian leader and a worldly leader? It's not going to be the leadership itself, right? I mean, from the outside. The outside of leadership will look like leadership. We have to speak. We have to win their influence. We have to engage their wills. We have to be clear about our objectives, all these kind of things. And these are going to be the same things on the outside. The difference is on the inside. You see, it's the motivation that we take into that leadership, right? So the motivation that we take into leadership as Christians is that we are leading with and in the love of God. There's someone on the other side of our leadership who's calling us into this, right? And when we lead with that kind of heart, well, we do things that the world would never do. One of them is that we transform suffering with the courage of a Christian to make it the place of love. And when we do that, we can give to this world an incredible blessing. We can witness to this world that suffering has been redeemed in Christ, and that on the cross there is a hope that is greater than loss and greater than death. It's the gift of God through his cross. And maybe that's exactly why he has you in the places of leadership in which he has you, so that you can bear the cross in front of them, just as he bore it in front of the Romans and in front of the people of power of his day. And he died there on the public road next to the gate of Jerusalem, so that the whole world could see that God's love is greater than our sorrows and our sufferings. And so in the same way, we who follow him carrying our crosses, we can do the same and give this world this great proclamation of hope.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.